All right, so we have now talked about component units of a primary government and how they get reported. Let's actually talk a little bit about the financial statements. Okay, so what we're actually going to start with is this slide again. You guys have seen it before. You should be more familiar with it. But now we are going to be looking much more in depth at the financial information that's presented on the comprehensive financial reports, those CAFRs, that were required to prepare the same financial statements that we've discussed so far in chapters 1 and 2, but now we're going to evaluate the actual financial statements for both levels of financial reporting. If you remember, we have two different levels of reporting. The first is those government-wide financial statements, of which we have 2 statements, and then we have the fund basis financials, of which we have several, right? So we're actually going to start with government-wide financial statements, which is typically, it's kind of backwards, actually, but hear me out. So typically what you're going to do is you're going to start here at the bottom, and then you're going to work your way up to those fund basis statements, those fund level financial statements, and then take those and work your way up into the government-wide financial statements. However, we're going to be doing this a little backwards. We're going to start at the top so that you have at least some understanding of what the end goal is specifically. Okay, so the majority of the remainder of the class we're going to spend on the other fund types and reporting on those in detail. Then we'll circle back to government-wide again in chapter 8, I believe. But right now, we're going to start with these government-wide financial statements and learn how to prepare those. Now, I will warn you, these look somewhat scary when you first see them because there's a lot of information on them. They do not look like your typical for-profit financial statements. They are generally bigger, contain more information. You're going to have a lot more columns. So it looks like a lot, but as we go through this step by step, I hope you'll see that it's not really that much. A lot of it we're just going to be transcribing. Okay, we're separating it into government and business-like activities and then total and all that type of thing. So hopefully as you see more and more of it, you'll understand that it's not quite as intimidating as it looks. So let us start looking at the government-wide statements now. So as you recall, we have 2 different statements in the government-wide statements. The first of those is the statement of net position. If you recall from the chapter 1 stuff we talked about, this is going to be similar to what you would consider a balance sheet for your for-profits, right? This measures your assets, your liabilities. It measures the financial position of the government, right? That's how I try to remember this. Again, I'll remind you guys, I think balance sheet gives us a measure of the financial position as of a certain date or a certain time. And that is exactly what the statement of net position is giving us. One thing to note here, also underlined and bolded, is that the statement of net position is going to use the economic resources function or measurement focus, right? What does that mean to us? It means they measure everything. They're going to measure current and they're going to measure non-current. Second one we have is the statement of activities, and this one is similar to your income statement. Now, I say similar, but similar in terms of it's going to present the same kind of information. It's going to show you measures of revenues and expenses. It's going to measure those using the accrual basis of accounting that you guys are used to doing. However, it is not going to look like what you typically see in a for-profit income statement. There's going to be much, much more on this. Again, it looks intimidating, but I promise you we will get through it. So, the government-wide statements, they may show some prior year data to compare for current year results. One big thing to take note of here is that unlike in for-profit companies or commercial reports, there is no statement of cash flow. Okay, the statement of cash flow does not exist for the government entities. Now, we do it in the fund level reporting for those enterprise funds, for those proprietary funds, but we do not do them at the government-wide level. At this top level of reporting, no statement of cash flows. The other thing that you'll be happy about is that we do not include the fiduciary funds in our government-wide statement of position, right? Those are only going to be prepared at the fund level. The simple way to think about that, it's not our money anyway. if we included something that we were a fiduciary for, it gives kind of a dishonest look. It's not really a true story. It's not a fair representation of what our resources actually are, right? So one way to think about it, we don't report those fiduciary funds in the government-wide statement simply because it's not our money anyway, and we've reported them at the fund level. So only those governmental and proprietary category type funds will be carried forward. So that is really why it's important for you to look at both the government-wide and the fund level statements, because then you do get the whole picture, right? We don't want to include those fiduciary funds in our government-wide because then it looks like we have more resources than we do, but we do include them in the fund level statements to say, hey, oh yeah, guys, don't forget, we're also taking care of this money. It's not ours, we don't get to use it, but we are fiduciaries for it. So the first thing we're going to look at here, we're going to take a look at the government-wide statement of net position. Again, this is kind of like the government-wide, or excuse me, this is kind of like the balance sheet for a for-profit company, right? One thing you'll notice is that we do not have equity. I mentioned this in an earlier video, but we can kind of think of net position as equity in governmental accounting, right? And we'll do that by kind of renaming equity in our accounting equation. Instead of A equals L plus E, we'll have A equals L plus net position, or A minus assets minus liabilities equals net position, right? So that net position is shown in 3 different categories that we've got listed here. The first one is going to be your net investment in capital assets. Your second one is going to be restricted type net position. And your third one is going to be unrestricted net position, okay? We classify assets and liabilities into current and non-current categories, just like we would do in a for-profit company. And we list our assets in the order of liquidity. However, take notice over here on the right-hand side, you will see that we have 3 different columns. First column, governmental activities. Second column, business type activities. And then the third column is a total of the 2. So when you see the information, when we start working through one of the problems, you do not want to combine them all at once. You'll want to make sure that you have broken these out into governmental and business type activities. So the next thing we're actually going to do now is we're going to take a look at a real example here, so that you guys can kind of see how these are put together. So the following, you'll see that the following information is available for preparation of the government-wide financial statements for the city of Southern Springs as of April 30th, 2017. This is exercise 2.7 in your book, I believe. So when you prepare this statement of net position, this kind of governmental type balance sheet, begin by classifying your account types or categories, right? This particular set of information is very straightforward. It's very simple, okay? It won't be difficult to determine. They tell us exactly which ones are government type, which ones are business types. They're very simple accounts. It's cash. Oh, that's an asset. Receivable, that's an asset. We know those types of things. However, it is going to get more confusing and more complex as we move on. And one way to kind of make sure you don't really overwhelm yourself is to just classify these from the very beginning, right? So this is a current asset. This is current liability. This is net position. This is a non-current asset. This is a non-current liability. And then is it government? Is it business, right? If you can classify those, that'll tell you where it needs to go. And it'll help you from getting confused later on. So if I were you, this is what I would do. I would pause the video now, fill in those account types in your notes, and then unpause the video, and we'll walk through each section of the financial statement together. All right, so the first one we have, first group we have are current assets, cash and cash equivalents, governmental type. We know cash is an asset. It's the most liquid asset we have. We've got cash and cash equivalents for business type activities. That also is going to be a current asset. Receivables for both governmental and business type, those are current assets. And then we have inventory also a current asset. So we will label those account types there. Then we'll move on to our non-current assets, or our capital assets. That's what we like to call them here in government. We call them capital assets. They are long-term or non-current. So we have business type, capital assets. Now we're going to move on to our current liabilities. You have accounts payable. You guys know, or should know at this point, that accounts payable are current liabilities. They split them out here for us, thankfully, again, into governmental and business type. And then we have our non-current liabilities, again, governmental and business type. And then finally, these last ones, you may be asking yourselves, what are these? We don't have equity. Well, that's true. We don't really have equity, but we can kind of think of net position as our equity. And as you can see here, it's broken into those kind of categories that they gave us earlier, right? Investments and capital assets, and then restricted. What we don't know is our unrestricted, right? So we will figure that out. So let's start with our assets here for statement of net position, right? Very simple. You're just going to simply take and transpose, right? Or not transpose. You're going to take and you're going to put these amounts into the correct column. So cash equivalents at $3.85 million. You're going to move that into the governmental activities. Same thing with the business type. And you're just going to continue all the way down until you hit your total assets number, right? So you're going to have total assets for governmental, total assets for business type, and then what I call the total, or your total assets, okay? If that makes sense. If not, please contact me with any questions you might have about that. But so far, so good. I think this is a pretty simple illustration for what we're going to be doing. Now, you need to be comfortable doing this because you're going to be doing this in your homework this week. Moving on to liabilities, we've only got a few. We've got 2 current liabilities and 2 non-current. You can see we've got account payables and then some form of non-current liability, right? Maybe note payable, something like that. Who knows? Again, these are split out into government, business, and total. So you'll see you just fill those in until you get your total government, your total business, and your total. And finally, and this is the one that can get a little tricky if you're not careful, if you're not paying attention, you may trip yourself up here. But if you watch this video and you follow along and you're working through your notes, I think you're going to have an easier time with this. So what we're going to do is we're going to figure out our net position. Well, they give us 2 of the 3 categories, right? They give us the net invested in capital assets and then the net position that's restricted. And they tell us here specifically it's restricted for debt service. They split them both out into government and business type activities. So let's go ahead and fill in what we know, right? So we know the net investment, we know the restricted. What we don't know is unrestricted, and we don't know total. So how are we going to find those? Well, pretty simple. We're going to solve for the total net position first, and then we'll use that to back into the unrestricted net position number. So recall the accounting equation that we can use here. We can use assets equal liabilities plus equity, or net position, or we can use asset minus liabilities equals net position, right? That second one is the one that we're going to use to find that total net position. So all you're going to do is you're going to take your total assets, just like the formula says, plug in what you know, right? A minus L equals X, right? So 15.1 minus 6.1 equals X. X is our total net position, and total net position here is 9 million for governmental, 10,211,000 for business, and a total of $19,211. That gets us to our total net position. Remember, that was the first one that we wanted to find. Now we can use that to back into our unrestricted, because they didn't list our unrestricted funds for us, correct? So we're going to back into that. Well, now we know 3 of the 4 numbers that we need to know in order to solve for this, right? So you're simply going to take your total assets minus your total liabilities. That gives you the total net position that you got, right? Now we're going to remove our net investment in capital assets, that net position, that $5,150,000 there at the top row. You're going to remove from that your restricted net position for governmental, $754,000, third row. And that's going to give you $3,096,000 as unrestricted net position. And then you'll do the same thing for your business life, and you can sum those together to get your total. So now we can fill that into our unrestricted, and looks like we have our answer. Now, make sure that you are familiar with this. Make sure that you can do this comfortably, because this is going to be something that you'll see on exams, something you're going to see on quizzes and homework, things like that. You are going to see these things. So make sure that you're familiar with this. If you do have questions, you can always ask me. This is what our complete statement of net position is going to look like once we're finished. As you can see, it's a little bit bigger, a little more intimidating looking than a typical balance sheet you're going to look at for a for-profit. if we're looking at a simple from a simple perspective. But hopefully, walking through that, you can see it's really not as difficult or as intimidating as it appears to be at first glance. So, again, if you got any questions or anything, just call me, email me, set up a meeting, whatever you need to do. Thanks.